We're going to have to move on, and the next speaker is Steve Lewandowski from the University of Bristol, who will be speaking on another terrible global challenge we face that is very related to Dave's. So, Steve, why don't you take it away?
Okay, thank you. And I hope you can see, yes, apparently my slides show. Okay, my job today was to give you a broad overview of the relationship between online technology and democracy, and how there are pressure points between human cognition and the online environment that have adverse consequences, we think, for democracy. And based on a recent analysis that my colleagues and I published, we've identified 4 such pressure points. And in 15 minutes, I can't go through all of them. So I will focus on just 2, namely what's known as the attention economy, which David just hinted at the end of his talk, and algorithmic content curation. And I just want to talk a little bit about what that means, what the implications are, and what we can do about it, focusing in particular on algorithmic content curation. So what's the attention economy? Well, the attention economy is basically your online environment. Whenever you go on Facebook or on Twitter or Instagram or whatever it is, your attention is the main product online. Now, that's not always true, but it is very much true on social media. And as a rule of thumb, if anything is free online, then you're being sold. Then you are, as the customer, the user, you're the product whose attention is being sold. And the dwell time of a person on a platform translates into advertising revenue. And that is why all the platforms have little features to keep you there for longer than you might otherwise have stayed. One prime example is the autoplay feature on YouTube, which means that a video just keeps running, even one that you haven't chosen, it just automatically shows up, and you can spend hours just watching videos that you never selected on YouTube, and of course, being exposed to ads throughout. Now, I think on the one hand, this is terrific. It has created many free services like Google Maps, other things that are indispensable to our lives, but it comes at a cost. And the cost comes out of our basic human attentional biases, which are listed here, some of them. So we tend to attend to emotional stimuli, in particular to negative emotions. And there's an old sort of saying in journalism that, you know, if it bleeds, it leads. You put it on the front page of the tabloids to get people's attention. So this has long been known, but of course now we are in an economy where that can be exploited by people who are producing disinformation. And the reason this is so is shown in this graph, which I have to explain. This was done by somebody in our lab, Almark Simshon, who looked at 160,000 full-text news articles. They were chosen because they had been retweeted by members of the US Congress. And he performed a computational text analysis to determine the emotional slant of each of those 160,000 full-text articles. And he then related the emotional slant to the quality of the domain. And the graphs you're seeing here are showing quality on the y-axis and intensity of emotional slant on the x-axis. And if you focus on the negative emotions, anger, disgust, fear, negative generally, sadness, and so on, then you find that the more of that emotion is present, the less reliable is that news source on average. And the problem is that the platforms make more money from the highly emotive articles or content because that is what people preferentially attend to. So here's an immediate translation of the commercial imperatives of the platforms into lower quality of information. And this is something, obviously, we're going to have to deal with. Now, unfortunately, right now, that's the only thing I can mention about the attention economy. Let me move on to the algorithmic content curation, which is also sometimes known in the extreme case as micro-targeting. Now, again, this is a double-edged sword. On the one hand, having recommender systems that tell me on Amazon what other book I might want to buy are terrific. I mean, I love Amazon's recommendations. I can't help it. I'd love to buy all the books they say I should look at because they know what I want. But the problem is, if I want something that is bad for democracy, then yes, they will also recommend that to me, namely increasingly extremist or radicalizing content. And this is non-trivial because we have a lot of data from lab experiments showing that recommender systems and so on causally influence our preferences and perceptions. And given that about a third of all videos consumed on YouTube were never chosen by the user, we have to be concerned about the impact that might have, in particular when it comes to ads, mainly in the political domain. Now, talking about advertising briefly, the best ad is the one you only show to people who are going to buy your product. If you show an ad to somebody who doesn't buy your product, you've wasted money. And we all lose because prices go up because advertising costs are increased. So it's in our interest collectively as a society for ads to be targeted at the people who are most likely to buy a particular product. Now, that's been the case for a long time. You're not going to see too many cosmetic ads in motorcycle magazines, for example. This is audience segmentation. That has been around forever. But what hasn't been around forever is that you can infer users' personalities and then allow advertisers to target people based on their personality. Here's a patent that Facebook has, which is very open about it. You know, we infer your personality and then we target advertisements and messages to users. The empirical evidence for that is very clear. If I have 300 Facebook likes, I know that person better than their own spouse. There's a machine learning study that has shown that. And I can then target people on the basis of their personality. Does this work, the so-called micro-targeting? Well, here's a study from some time ago that, in my opinion, made that case very nicely. There are two ads here for cosmetic products. And the one on the left, it turns out, appeals to people who are extroverted. The one on the right appeals to people who are introverted. And if you can now direct these ads on Facebook to people whose personality you know from their likes, then you can maybe sell products more to people if the ad matches their personality. Is that true? Well, yes, in this particular study, that was the case. I can show you the data and explain the design at the same time. Basically, they showed ads that were targeting introverts and extroverts, introverts in green, extroverts in blue. They target them to an audience that was either matched or mismatched. And you can see instantly that if the ads match the audience, then the conversion rate is the actual number of clicks that people act on the ads. That is higher when the ads match than when they don't. And there's other studies showing a similar thing. So we do know that targeted advertising is very effective. Now, I'm not terribly concerned about cosmetics, to be honest, but I am very concerned about political messages that might be micro-targeted to people based on their personality, for the reasons listed here, because this is happening without the people really being aware of it. It's concealed because you don't know that you're being targeted. If messages are targeted to segments of an audience, in the extreme case to a single individual, then you can't rebut that. You cannot have a democratic debate if it has taken place furtively and in secret between people who issue ads and others that are being targeted. So there's some serious problems, in my opinion, with political micro-targeting. And the question is, what can we do about it other than legislate against it? Well, my colleagues and I have explored two options to deal with micro-targeting. I want to talk about both of them briefly. One approach is to boost users' knowledge about themselves. I'm now going to show you very briefly an experiment where we got people's introversion, extroversion score in a brief questionnaire. We then gave them feedback about their score. Shown here, this person was extroverted, blah, blah, blah. Here's his score. This is how you compare to other people. Once they knew that score in the experimental condition, they were presented the ads from the study I already explained, which were designed to appeal to extroverts or introverts. So the task now in this experiment for people was to decide whether or not they were being targeted. And we knew their scores, so we could pick out how accurately they were able to identify that they were being targeted. Well, and here are the data. It turns out that if you give people feedback about their personality and explain it to them, if you boost their abilities to recognize themselves, their accuracy in detecting that they're being targeted is about 30% higher than it is in a control condition where no such feedback was provided. In other words, in something like a minute or two, we can train people to know when they're being targeted on the basis of their personality, using up to now cosmetic ads, which I said aren't terribly important, but of course we're currently working on extending this to political material. And one way in which we're extending this to political material is by designing machine learning tools that are alerting people when they might be micro-targeted. How does that work? Well, the goal here is to provide some plugin or other tool that alerts users when they're being exposed to messages that are so consonant with their values and their personality that it's almost too good to be true. In other words, hang on, you're being sent a message that is so aligned with your personality that maybe somebody is trying to manipulate. That's the goal. And can we do that? Well, yes, we can. We have a machine learning algorithm that can associate personality or has associated personality with consumed text. There's a complicated methodology in the background here that I don't have time to explain. But the bottom line is we have a small but reasonable effect size and effectiveness in being able to alert people when they're exposed to messages that we think are likely, or at least possibly, designed to be consonant with their personality beyond what might be expected by chance. And that gives people the choice to then look at this message with a more critical eye, which is our goal in doing this. So, conclusions of the focal point of my talk about micro-targeting. Yes, it is possible. There's no question about it. It is also effective. There's a number of studies that show this to my satisfaction. And it is problematic when it comes to political content for a number of reasons that I've briefly alluded to. And there's at least two ways in which we can deal with it. One is by teaching people something about themselves. The other one is through machine learning tools. And of course, the third way of dealing with it is through regulation. And just if you're interested in this, I can pop the link in the chat. I was responsible for a report for the European Union that came out about a year and a half ago, and where we outlined basically everything I've talked about today, and that proposes some solution to this through clever regulation without introducing censorship. And the EU is in fact working on that right now and has two initiatives that have just been passed that in part are looking at some of these recommendations. And with that, I think I took an extra minute. Sorry for that. I want to thank my funders and collaborators, and I look forward to your questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Steve. We have time for a couple questions, so anyone in person, if you want to line up by the microphone, go ahead, or on chat if you have a question there. While we're waiting, I'm going to start off with an evil one for you, Steve, which is, so the thing that I keep thinking, like, on the one hand, there are what you might call individual level solutions, like sort of teaching people to be aware when they're being manipulated and so forth. And then there's also systemic kind of level solutions like regulations. And on balance, what does success require? What kind of mix of these things? Where should we be focusing our efforts the most?
Well, undoubtedly on the systemic end. I mean, there's no question in my mind that what we can do as cognitive scientists is, incremental, and it's helpful, and of course we should do it. We should teach people this, et cetera, but that's not going to solve the problem by itself. We also, as I think David has said, you got to get the platforms engaged in making sure that they're not favoring low quality information in the first place. That really is the tricky issue, that they're not making money out of destroying democracy. It's as simple as that. We got to break that link. And right now, I would argue that that link is, strong enough for concern.
All right, great. I mean, not great, but thank you. Any other questions? Okay, I see one person. Go ahead.
Hi. Whoa. The microphone was too high. This is Emily Bender from the University of Washington. Thank you. I really appreciate this work that connects to big problems. I have a very specific question, though. In the study where you showed how you could sensitize people to whether or not they're being targeted, do you have evidence that that persists, those 2 minutes of training, or is it just a short-term effect?
Good question. I don't have evidence from this particular study about the longevity of the effect. However, we have done a large number of studies within this domain of boosting in inoculation, where we've shown that these effects last surprisingly long. Now, this is now not personality. It is about inoculating people against misleading rhetoric. But we have a paper in the pipeline where we show that we can take this out to months. And if we have little booster shots of these, repeated 30-second treatments, then there is, competence remains very high. And even without that, we're talking about several weeks when it can still be shown to be effective. So, which is remarkable. But we've also got a paper coming out in August in Science Advances, where we've done a big study on YouTube using this inoculation with just a single 30-second intervention, and that lasts for up to 24 hours very reliably. We can pick it up statistically. It's quite a reasonable effect. So it doesn't just disappear in seconds.
Great, thank you. And that actually is great. Thanks again, Steve.